Interesting question, and of course it starts long before you're an executive woman. And the first one is always, always to grab your opportunities. Take some risks and grab your opportunities. Don't wait until everything is perfect before you do the next thing. Go for things when they come up. Some of those will be risky, some of them won't work, but some of them will work. That's the main thing. Number two, try and be inclusive. I think being inclusive, try not to judge others too much. And many of you are very clever people. Try not to be judgmental. You never know where the best idea is going to come from. And then three, always work in teams. Work with people around you. Loners, some loners do very well. I feel people who work with teams, who build relationships, and as they leave one thing and go to the other, have people with whom they have worked and from whom they have learnt other things to be good leaders. The old style of leading from the front, into the valley of death, rode the 500, is not a model I support. I support more a servant leadership model. What's the goal today? Who's the expert? Let the expert run that. Of course, in the end, I'm always the decision maker at Deakin, but I'm not always the leader of the project because the best person in the room leads the project. Learning to do that was one of the hardest things I ever did because by definition, I tend to want to take the lead. But it's probably the most successful thing I've done because I've learned to work with teams, to be in the team and to lead the team. And that's been my management style, which has, in my view, been quite an effective style for me. But above all else, if you don't take your opportunities, you'll never get anywhere. I think everybody should fail at something at least once. In my case, it was not getting a very high-profile job. I didn't get the job. The entire university knew I was the applicant and I didn't get it. I think failure forces you to reflect on what you are good at, but also what you are not good at. Being able to pick yourself up from the humiliation of failure. It's the humiliation of failure rather than the failure itself. And to learn from it and to move on is one of the things we all need to learn. I am interested that some people don't recover, that they obsess and they stay with whatever the thing was, the hurt and the blame and whatever happened. Have a failure, learn from it and move on. I am a better, stronger leader, a more insightful and more tolerant leader as a consequence of the failure of something that happened to me than I might have been if I'd carried on my brilliant career. Many women have excelled at their university career, have then excelled in their first few positions and often don't experience. They experience many other things, but often not failure of going for an opportunity, often because they don't, or if they do, they get the job. Failing at something. Of course, you don't want to keep repeating the fails. You want to fail once. Obviously, it's something that's not too damaging for the community as a whole, and then to learn from it and move on. If only. If my wise self was looking back and talking to me as a 35-year-old or 30-year-old, it would be to stress a bit less, particularly about criticism, about being overly ambitious, or the patronisation of some of the people I worked with at times, because often I was the only woman in the room, is to ignore all that and know, now I know, that I did learn, and I learned to include those people, or to ignore them, and to pay them their dues of not listening to what they had to say. But at the time, it was a big deal of trying to fit in with people who I was never going to fit in with. And I'd say to lots of particularly younger women, stress less about some of those things, and if you think you're on the right track and you do have a good idea, own your idea and speak up for it. First thing is, why do you want one? Is it because you want someone famous who will look good on the CV? That's not a good reason for a mentor. If you want someone from whom you can genuinely bat ideas onto and get honest, truthful, often robust advice back, to help you in the progress of your journey, and it's usually about your career journey, then you should get a mentor. Of course, many people think they need a physical mentor in the same town. I think these days we can do mentorship in many different ways, and we need to think wide and broad about who is a mentor and where those people are. And so looking across the globe, there are many people you can follow now on Twitter and various places, and see what they say and what they do and how they behave and how they accept what has happened to them. Hillary Clinton is the most famous example at the moment of someone who is having to endure having lost something that probably should have been hers. I can think of many other people. Rosie Batty, an incredible example of someone who has endured and moved on. And look at all the successes we have. The Australian of the Year last year, 2018, the 2018 Australian of the Year, a brilliant person to follow her. Took a risk on quantum computing and has played it out and is an outstanding scientist that we can all learn from, just from the way she conducts herself and the things that she says. However, getting a mentor that is close to home, that you can have the cup of tea with, that you can say, here's what's going wrong, and getting the advice is a very important thing. And I do believe that everyone in their career should have that person or persons. It doesn't have to be a woman, can be a woman. I have a number of mentors that I've used over the years. One of them is my PhD, my honours supervisor, and that's a long, long time ago. I often used to ask him advice, less so now because he's very aged, but I always used to ask his advice. He always used to say to me, get back into the lab and do some proper science, and then I'd go off and get the next job. But I talked it over with him, and we had discussed it, and it worked. I have another mentor who is a woman who I occasionally talk to and who will give me robust advice and usually doesn't say much at all other than say, well, this is what you said, now what do you think? You know, that's probably the right way. And when I reflect now, often you're not giving advice. What you're doing is reinterpreting what you've heard from the person talking to you. I have many people in the university and outside that I mentor now. And often it's 10-minute chat on the phone, often it's an email. Occasionally it's an organised meeting where we reflect on things. I don't give advice, but what I do is saying, so what would you most like to do? Why do you think that particular thing went wrong or right, etc. The conversation is what matters for me in a mentor relationship. Well, my experience is I don't want mentees who see me as a trophy. You know, the Vice Chancellor is my mentor. That is not helpful. I'm interested in mentees who have goals and ambitions, have ambition to do something, and then if it's interesting and I believe the person is someone that I can interact with and relate to, then I'm delighted to do that. And I think that's the most important thing for me. The routine of setting meetings and who sets the meetings, that works out. And it shouldn't be an organised every 6 weeks we'll have a meeting, although sometimes if something's big on, you know, going for a job and delivering an application where you can sometimes help, you might have 2 or 3 meetings. But busy people often don't have organised time. So it is about what is the issue at hand and then growing the relationship over a period of time. And the mentees, if they are wanting to get something out of it, doing whatever it is they said they were doing. You know, I'll send you my resume once I've done it. Well, if you leave it for 6 months, that's not a relationship. So it's actually talking and doing the things that is agreed that should be done between the two in the relationship. A mentor gets a lot out of a relationship with a mentee if the mentee is also getting involved. I wouldn't say cooperating, but it has to be a relationship and both people actually do benefit. I benefit enormously from talking to staff and other people about what their ambitions are. Often, mostly these days, they're much younger than me, and what they see the future of the world looking like. I learn from that. In return, I can hope to put up the mirror, use some of my experience and wisdom over the years and say, now what do you think you should do given everything on the table? Those are great relationships, and I love those cups of coffee with some of those people, mostly women. I mostly mentor women because I believe I owe a responsibility to get more women up to all levels of the society in which we all live, most particularly in higher education. Interesting. Sponsors should not often be the most powerful person you know. They should be people who have ideas. Usually ideas, I think, more than anything, ideas or influence, who can assist you with your idea or whatever it is. So sponsoring usually involves either financial advice or ideas. And those people often come from left field. They may, for us, we're talking about women who work in universities, in higher education. Maybe they're people who come from the community at large, who've done other things, who may not have the education that we have, but have life skills and business skills and street skills and know everyone. Those sorts of people are always smart and clever. They may not have the shingle of education, but never underestimate their cleverness, their intelligence, and their capacity to help you get things done. And we often get quite blindsided, in the narrow band of who we are and the education band we live in. But that's not where the world is. We're in a very privileged minority. The world is somewhere else, and the sponsors are mostly in that world, and their life experiences being different to ours are helpful. Well, making a success is usually the way. So if it is a plan of some description, whatever it is, raising money for an idea or for a project of some description, getting a result, of course, is very successful for your career. You can use it. I wouldn't go for it for that reason, to help your career. I think you have to be quite careful that self-interest is very, very important, and we must be self-interested to a point with our careers, but we need to be quite careful how we manage those things and how we rate the success of the sponsorship that we get. I think what is more important is that the sponsor believes that the time or the money or whatever it is they contributed to the relationship is rewarded in some way. If that is achieved, that's a great career outcome for the person being sponsored in whatever it is that you're doing. It's not my great experience. I've only had a few things where I have worked with a direct sponsor for something. Generally, it's been to raise money for a project. Getting the money for the project has never been the win. Getting the outcomes from the project that everybody is proud of and there's a team delight has been the career win that you then can use when you're applying for something or when you're talking about your own career.